So now comes the fun part. We have our UI all set, so we want to start to add our JavaScript. Now there's quite a few things we want to bring in here. We want to bring in our balance. So let's say document get element by ID. Bring in our balance. And we'll go ahead and copy this down a few times. What do we got? 4, let's do 5, 6, 7. So this is going to be the money dash plus, which is this right here. So we'll call this money. I'm going to give it an underscore here just because we have money plus and money minus. Of course, you can format your variables however you want. So this will be money minus, and then this is going to be our list, and we'll call this list. Then we have, of course, our form. Gave that an ID of form. And then we have the text field. And then we have the amount field. Okay, so those should be all the DOM elements we need. Now, ultimately, this stuff is going to get stored in local storage, the transactions that we add, with the expenses and the income. But for now, let's just have it come from an array. So we'll call this dummy transactions. And it'll be an array of objects. And you know what? I'll just go ahead and paste these in. So basically, what this is going to look like, our objects, is going to have an ID. It's going to have text, and it's going to have an amount, which is either going to be a negative amount or a positive amount. If it's a negative, it's going to be an expense. If it's positive, it's going to be income. So that's how our data is going to look. So I'm going to create a variable here called transactions, which is like basically our global state for our transactions. And I'm just going to set it for now to dummy transactions. But later on, we'll link up local storage. So we need to add these transactions to the DOM. We want them to be displayed in our history. So let's create a function to do that. Add transactions to DOM list. So function add, we'll call this add transaction DOM. It's going to take in transaction. Now we have to, again, distinguish the income from the amounts. So first thing I'm going to do here is get the sign. Okay, so a single transaction is going to be passed into this. So we'll have a variable called sign, and we're going to set that to the transaction dot amount. So the transaction object, the amount property, and we'll say if that is greater than 0, then I'm just using a ternary here, which is a shorthand if statement. So if that's, less than 0, then we want the sign to be minus. Else, which is represented with a colon, then we want it to be a plus. So that will give us the sign based on whatever the value is here. So next what we want to do is create a new element. I'm going to call this item, and we're going to use document dot create element, and we're going to create a list item, because what we're doing here is we're structuring, if we look in our HTML, we're structuring this right here. Okay, so as far as the class goes, it's either going to be minus or plus based on if it's income or expense. So right here, let's do that. We'll say add class based on value. So we'll say item dot, and then we have our class list property, and we can call dot add to add a class. And again, we'll put a ternary in here, and we'll say if the transaction dot amount is less than 0, then the class will be minus, else the class will be plus. So that'll add the class. Now we're going to take our item, and we're going to set the inner HTML to a template string, so we want to make sure we use backticks here so we can put in variables or expressions. The first thing is going to be the text. We can get that from the transaction objects text property. Then we have a span. So we're just formatting it just like we did in the HTML. In the span, we're going to have the amount. Now, we want the sign, so we're going to have, let's go ahead and do this. So we want the sign, oops, that should be a $sign, which will be either plus or minus. And then after that, we want another expression, and we want the amount. So transaction dot amount. Now, the transaction amount will already have, it'll either have a minus sign or it'll be just positive. It won't have anything. So we want to strip off the minus sign. We just want the value because we already have the sign. It's going to tell us if it's positive or negative. It's also going to have the color code, the border. So what we can do is wrap this in the absolute, so math.abs, ABS. And what that'll do is if it's negative, it'll just turn it into a positive. It's just turn it into an absolute number. So we'll use that there. And then after the span, we're going to have our delete button. So let's say button, and we want to give this a class of delete-btn. And ultimately, I'm going to just have an inline event listener on this, but we're not going to do the delete functionality yet, so I'm not going to put it just yet. And this is just going to be an X. Okay, so that should do it for the HTML. Now to actually add it to the DOM, we'll take the list, the UL, and we'll append child. So we're going to append a child element, and that child element will be the item. So that's our function. Now we haven't called the function yet, so it's not going to add anything, but we're going to actually go down here and we're going to have an init. So let's say init app. So this is actually going to run right away. And in here, we're going to set transactions, not transactions, we're going to set list.inner HTML. We want to basically clear out the list, so we're just going to set that to nothing. And then we'll take the transactions, which is the array up above, which is right now, it's connected to that dummy transactions, and we're going to loop through with a for each. And we'll say, in the for each, the function that I want to run is this add transaction to DOM, okay, which takes in a transaction, which is going to be the item in this for each. So let's say add transaction to DOM, and down here we'll go ahead and run init. So now if I save, you can see that everything is getting added here. And we have the text, we have the amount, and we also have the color codes. So we know that this is an expense because for one, it has the sign, which comes from this variable here, and also the color code from the CSS class. So what I want to do in the next video is make this work up here. We want the total income, so we want to add all the income and the total expense, and then we want our leftover balance. So we'll get into that next.